Okay, is anyone else intrigued by the amount of Disney news that we've been getting recently? So not only have they just replaced their CEO with the old CEO, and there's a lot of talk about floundering stock prices and all of that kind of thing, but they've also been hit with an antitrust suit over live streaming TV prices. So YouTube TV subscribers take issue with Disney's ownership of Hulu and ESPN, which they say has allowed to drive the prices up across the market. So this is an antitrust lawsuit and kind of goes back to a 1948 Supreme Court ruling, which effectively marked the downfall of the studio system and the golden era of Hollywood. But the antitrust lawsuit has been brought against the Walt Disney Company in a case that targets the entertainment monolith's dual role as a content supplier and distributor in business dealings. So Disney operates Hulu whilst also controlling ESPN. The lawsuit accuses them of managing them both as a single entity. So the lawsuit is accusing Disney of operating Hulu and ESPN as a single entity, and that means that the company can negotiate anti-competitive agreements with competitors that have inflated the cost of live television streamed over the internet. So the suit, they point to business dealings that effectively grant the company the ability to set a price floor for the market and push up prices across the industry by raising the prices of its own offerings. Since Disney acquired operational control over Hulu in May 2019, prices across the streaming live paid television market, including for YouTube TV, have doubled. This dramatic market-wide price inflation has been led by Disney's own price hikes for Hulu and live TV. So essentially it's influencing the market as well as the results and successes of other companies. And again, it goes back to the 1948 Supreme Court ruling, which again ended the studio system. So the studio system is a method of filmmaking where both production and distribution is dominated by a small number of movie studios. The term is often used in reference to the golden age of Hollywood, like 1920s to 1960s roughly. And studios produced films primarily through their own filmmaking lots with creative personnel often under long-term contract. And especially, this is the important bit, which is they dominated exhibition through vertical integration, as in the ownership or effective control of distributors and exhibition, guaranteeing additional sales of the film through manipulative booking techniques such as block booking. So the studio system was challenged under the antitrust laws in the 1948 Supreme Court ruling, which sought to separate production from the distribution and exhibition and ended such practices, thereby hastening the end of the studio system. So again, this is similar to the Disney lawsuit. So the studio system is really interesting because it's effectively like a David and Goliath story. The studios would create the films, they had guaranteed distribution and exhibition, so releasing in cinemas, which meant they had guaranteed box office takings, meant they had guaranteed revenue, and they were using manipulative tactics like block booking to shut out other films, increase their box office takings, and increase the success of the films, which meant they could make more films and the whole process would be repeated. But the reason I find this really interesting is because that Supreme Court ruling was from 1948, and now with streaming platforms, we're kind of in uncharted territory. And so it is a little bit similar to the fact that, Disney has its own platform now. Disney has Disney Plus, Paramount has Paramount Plus, Netflix has, Netflix. But this is also why a lot of filmmakers get frustrated with Netflix films being released in cinemas, because it's seen as a cash grab. So the thing is, we're probably likely to see a lot more of these lawsuits coming up in future, where a lot of studios are creating their own streaming platforms and a lot of streaming platforms are starting to create their own productions. We saw it with Netflix. Their first original was Stranger Things. We're seeing it with BritBox starting to create BritBox originals. And because they know they have guaranteed distribution on their own streaming platform, they have guaranteed revenue with the monthly subscribers, the monthly paying subscribers that they have. It means that we're seeing a lot more of kind of streamlining, but also a lot less risk. And there are no real rules necessarily to what streaming platforms can and can't get away with, which is why Netflix can release its films on the festival circuit and release in cinemas and still make extra revenue from that, even though So it's really interesting seeing the streaming system and how similar it is to the studio system. But the one downside is that, well, there's more than one downside, but the main downside, I think, is that platforms are measuring the success of projects not with views, but with how many new subscribers they're bringing to the platform. So something like The Crown works really well because it brings in a lot of new subscribers with every new era. That's why you can get to the full 6 seasons, whereas most Netflix shows tend to get cancelled around the 3rd season because that's when the show stops bringing new subscribers to the platform. So again, with the streamlining of the streaming system and how similarly it works to the studio system, it means that filmmakers can become even more limited in not just what they can achieve, but what they can. So similarly to the studio system, the streaming system works brilliantly when you're inside of the system because you have guaranteed money, you have guaranteed revenue. They're happier to take a lot more risks because there's guaranteed audience, guaranteed revenue. So it's great when you're inside the system. But if you're outside of the system, they make it virtually impossible for you to access the same resources, the same guarantees. No one's going to take that much risk. And the level of success that you can get to is also limited when you're competing with the giants that are the streaming platforms, in the same way that it was really difficult to compete with the giants of the studios back in the kind of golden era of Hollywood. So I mean, if you're inside the system, it's great. If you're outside the system trying to get in, it's really frustrating seeing what they can create. So this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Again, it's great if you're inside the system. It just means that independent filmmakers have to be more creative with how they get around the fact that they don't have access to the same things that streaming platforms do.